Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we start our summer garden review series. Let's get going. So today we're going to start our summer garden review series here in the top garden. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask, if you watch this channel and you enjoy it, do me a favor, hit the little subscribe button below. It really does help us out and it's free for you. If you enjoyed this video, you could also hit that little thumbs up button below. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to begin by taking a look back at what the garden looked like at the end of June. So it is now the second week of September, and this is what this top row looks like up here. So we'll begin by discussing what we grew in the top row. So down here where our chickens are scratching, down there we grew onions. In the front part of all of this, we grew dill. And then behind it, on that back side back there, we had trellised our pickling cucumbers. And then if we come around here to the start where we have, you can see this here, the trellis that we created with the cattle panel. And then here in the front, we did butternut squash. So we'll start at the end of the bed down there. The first thing we did were the onions. The onions came out really well. They didn't get quite as big as what I wanted originally, but looking back on it now, I believe that was because we left the soil level too low. I think that was kind of an issue with a lot of our beds this year. We thought it would keep the chickens from kicking the stuff out, and when in reality, what it did was it kind of created a shaded area, so the stuff on the lips didn't grow as big. Having said that, if I had to rank the onions this year, I would give them a solid B. We got a lot of them. We're still eating on them. They're delicious. The weird thing about them is we grew the 1015s, and the longer they cure, the sweeter they get. So that's a good thing. As we work our way down the first row, we'll start by talking about the dill. Now, the dill gets an A. It did really well. It grew really well in there. In fact, it actually was coming up right at the correct time when we were putting away our pickles. So that helped out a lot. We did have to buy just a little bit of dill from the store, but I believe that was because we had so many pickles. So that's what makes sense to me. So as far as the dill, like I said, we'll give it an A. And behind the dill, we had growing our pickling cucumbers. Now, our pickling cucumbers did very well. I think we could have gotten more out of them. And I would have given them a kind of a higher grade if we didn't have so many issues with, we had a lot of squash bugs on our cucumbers this year. I think maybe the drought had a lot to do with that. That's why we had to battle so many grasshoppers and things. There just wasn't the normal amount of foraging food available for a lot of animals through this summer because of the lack of rain. Also, the temperatures were stupid hot. Anybody who lives here in the South, actually, I guess anybody in the United States probably knows what I'm talking about. There were stupid heat waves that came through this year, but our garden made it. So if I had to give our pickling cucumbers a grade, I would say they were a B. We were able to fill up, meet our goals. We were able to fill up the refrigerator for the winter time. We also met our goals as far as able to give out pickles. We didn't have extra like I think we're going to if we would have had a normal year. So they get a solid B. The final thing that we grew in that top row was the butternut squash, and I'm going to give it a C-. The reason for that, again, we just didn't get a lot of it. The year before, we had so much butternut squash, we had to, you know, the cupboard was full, plus we were giving it out to the neighbors and they were tired of it. So that simply wasn't the case this year. We got some butternut squash. We do have some butternut squash in the pantry. It came up well short of our goals though. So it gets a C-, and that might be being generous. It might have a D, but anyway, again, I think a lot of that had to do with the temperature conditions, also the influx of pests because it was the only food around. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and go through the second row of the top garden. Now, during the year, down here we had spaghetti squash, and it was over a makeshift trellis. Next to that, on the back side, over here on that end down here, we had our slicing cucumbers. In the front of the slicing cucumbers, we started off with peppers, which the chickens destroyed, and then we created some tomato cages with chicken wire around them and put in tomatoes, and the tomatoes grew. So we had those all the way down, and then at the end you can still see it still in here are the sweet potatoes, and we'll wait until all the sweet potato leaves die back here in the late fall before we pull them out. So that's essentially row 2 of the top garden. I'm sorry, of the old garden. So for row 2 we'll do the same, and we'll start at the far end. Down there we had the sweet potatoes. Our sweet potatoes get an A. We've gone through and looked at those. We do have sweet potatoes under there. I can't wait to dig them up. We love sweet potatoes. We have so much food right now, it's probably best to leave them in there until everything dies so that we can maximize the amount that we eat during the fall. If I begin pulling them now, I'm gonna start eating them. That's just how it is with sweet potatoes. So I'm gonna give the sweet potatoes an A. We also went through and we're trying to learn to see if we can take some of the sprouts that are growing outside of the bed and transplant them. Who knows, it may or may not work, but that's why you saw them at the front side of the bed earlier. Another thing that we grew, the tomatoes. Now, I'm gonna give the tomatoes an NA, not applicable. And the reason for that is we had extra tomatoes and I just wanted to see the interaction between the tomatoes and the cucumbers. You can't grow tomatoes that close to cucumbers. Now you can grow them together, but I grew them way too close. The cucumbers grew all in the tomatoes. We did get some of the Rutgers tomatoes out of them and they were delicious. Our chickens also flew up on top of the cages and ate them because there was no barrier around them. So I'm giving them a not applicable just because it was an experiment to see what happens. So that'll bring us to the slicing cucumbers. And our slicing cucumbers, I'm gonna give a B. The reason for that is the same reason for the slicing cucumbers. There were so many pests and I was spraying and combating them daily. I was out here literally in the garden every morning for a few hours. And there was not a whole lot I could do about it. I mean, we got a whole lot of slicing cucumbers, enough for us, enough for the neighbors and family. Not as much as I think we would have if it was quote unquote a normal year, if there's any such thing as that in Arkansas. But if it was a normal temperature year without the crazy drought and the huge pest explosions, I think we would have had a whole lot more. That's the reason I gave it a B, is because I was sort of expecting a little bit more. And the final thing I want to talk about are the spaghetti squash. It was a disaster. The makeshift trellis out of the bamboo was awesome. I was really looking forward to it. We put the spaghetti squash in. For whatever reason, the bugs, they attacked them, and then our chickens decided they loved scratching around the spaghetti squash. So we got 2 spaghetti squash out of 3 spaghetti squash plants. And normally you're gonna get upwards of 20. So anyway, it was an abject failure. So just so that I don't crush my ego, I'm gonna give it a D-. So in review, if I had to give the second row a grade, I'm gonna give it a B. And that's because the sweet potatoes were so good, the slicing cucumbers were so good, and the tomatoes I didn't really count. All right, so down here on the third row, as we showed, we'll just review it real quick again. We have eggplant here. They're doing better now that we have removed the trellis of the cucumber. That was a poor idea on my fault. We'll go over that in the review here in a bit. On the other side of the eggplant though, we grew onions from here to the end of the T-post, the second T-post down there, and they were phenomenal. The onions, just like the other onions, we got a bunch of them. Also, those who watch the channel know that we left a couple in there that didn't have much, and they're starting to come back. So we'll see how they do here in the fall. Ray, are you and Oscar playing in the sweet potatoes? You guys messed my sweet potatoes up. All right, anyway, back to the topic. So the onions we had here, and then what we did was once the onions came out, we replaced them, and we went from this T-post all the way to the end with yellow summer squash. And it was delicious. Anybody who had yellow summer squash knows yellow summer squash is really good. So, like always, we'll start at the back end of the bed. So, I'd like to start by saying we got a bunch of yellow squash, like a bunch of it. The downside was we got it all at one time. So we would eat what we could and then we would give it out to the neighbors. In retrospect, after I went back and inspected the seeds and such that I planted, we planted only the early yellow crookneck variety. I thought that I had two separate varieties of yellow squash. I didn't. I only had the one. So once we hit about, I don't know, end of June, early July, all of those early crookneck squash, they started dying off. And the reason for that is, you know, that again, they're early crookneck squash. So they're designed to grow in the early part of the summer where you have less light, the days are getting longer, and the temperatures are usually, you know, under that 90-degree mark. Well, we didn't have a whole lot of those days. So as soon as it just got blazing hot, those things died off and we didn't have any more. And at that point, because I had planned so poorly and I had put the slicing cucumbers in front of them, I wasn't confident putting anything else in their place because it just didn't receive enough sun throughout the day for anything to go through. And especially at that point of the year, you know, like end of June, I didn't think it had enough sun for anything to come to and fruit for us. So we just left it be. So in retrospect, though, for what they were, I'm giving the yellow squash an A because we got a whole boat ton of them. And the expectation part was my fault because I didn't realize that both packages I was planting were the early variety. So anyway, in retrospect, the actual plants get an A. They did really well for what they were supposed to be for, but I'm an idiot and I misread the packages. So we'll move along. Coming on down to where we get to the onions. Again, the onions were phenomenal. They were delicious. We're still getting a few that are coming up now. Nothing like what we had. But next weekend, we do get to go pick up our fall onion sets. So that's a whole nother story. But anyway, the onions themselves, if I had to give them a grade, I'd give them an A. They grew really well. It was really easy to tell when the time came because of the year. Again, because the way the temperatures worked this year, they weren't able to get into the light, nice big bulbs that we were expecting. Doing the research on that, you know, onions, whenever they come to a certain point, when it gets to a certain heat, they'll go to seed, and that's when you have to pull them. And that's what happened to us. So because it got so hot so early, we had to pull them while they still weren't the size we wanted. But from a number standpoint and a taste standpoint, they were delicious. So I'm giving them an A, even though they weren't the size that we wanted. And then the next thing that we come down to is the eggplant. The eggplant, again, was user failure on my part. I put them down there. They got shaded out not only by the slicing cucumbers during the early sun, but then by the time the afternoon sun would hit, they only got part of the sun because the spaghetti squash was blocking their view. Lesson learned on my part, but now that, you know, the eggplant are bouncing back. We've had several eggplants now, but we didn't get hardly any of them during the summertime. So as far as the eggplant goes, and again, much of this is user error, not the actual plants themselves, but I'm gonna have to give them a D. So because we got so little through the course of the year, the food we got was phenomenal, but because most of this bed sat empty through most of the summer, which is a huge lost opportunity on our part, I'm gonna go ahead and give this bed down here, I'm gonna give it a C-.
Well, hello and good morning, everybody. So we're kind of talking about the transformation over the summer, what our gardens did, what they didn't do, what we could do better. So I'd like to show you my little portion of the old garden. So come along and we'll talk about it. So we started out in this bed this year. I'm sorry, Oscar likes to taste chickens. And we had put pumpkins in. And I will tell you, the pumpkins were going strong. They were doing great. And the chickens came in, and just every time the little vines would come out, they would just take them out. So pumpkins did not make it, but we have plans to move pumpkins somewhere else. But this bed is going to be used for possibly some other kind of vegetable. But the soil is fantastic. I mean, this bed would be fantastic for certain, like, brassica plants, things like that. But I really want pumpkins. Pumpkins did not make it this year. So, but this little guy, my echinacea, as you can tell, he's done. The leaves are still green, so I'm waiting till those kind of die back a little bit to trim him back. But he did get tall, and this was his second year to grow, and they are perennial, so it will come back next year, even though I'll trim it all the way down to the base. It did great. It brought in butterflies, a lot of pollinators, bees, and it did fantastic. We were super proud of this thing, and it was a volunteer, so 2 years ago it did great. And then, as you can tell, my spearmint is coming back. It's done amazing. This thing, I don't know, in middle of summer, we'll put a video link up to kind of give you an idea of what it looked like midsummer, but they got long and leggy, and I let them go to flower just for the pollinators, and then I trimmed it back. I did harvest a lot of it so we could dry it out, save it for my hot teas. Love it with some lavender and some honey in my tea. It gives it a nice kick, and it just smells delightful, and I just love coming out here and picking off little sprigs and eating them, and it's just gorgeous. Love this spearmint. So spearmint did fantastic, still coming back strong. My beautiful irises, these were transplanted from rhizomes that I pulled from what Grandma used to call the old man's grave around the fruit trees. My goal is to transfer a lot of those rhizomes sporadically out through different parts of the yard, so we have a little bit more pop and color closer to the house. These guys, this is their third year of being here. They did bloom, and they did fantastic. They bloomed for a while. I got a lot of flower heads this year on them. And fun story is they look like they die back. You just pull the dead leaves like this, and they'll just come right out, and then the rest of it'll stay green, and it'll do this until your first freeze. So pretty plants, and they come back every year. So Oscar, thanks for helping. My rosemary is still going strong. He looks kind of scraggly. The chickens get in here and like to eat off of it. Rosemary's good for keeping pests away, and it goes really good with homemade bread. So you can mix it into your dough. Tasty, love it. So he's doing beautiful. And again, these things will live several years, and this winter it'll kind of dry back, and I may trim it back a little bit and try to tame it down just because it's growing all wonky, but he's pretty happy. And then for this thing, originally this was a really bushy, tall oregano plant. It did fantastic. I trimmed it back, and this is all the new growth from trimming it back, and you can tell there's still some stalks on here that I had trimmed back. It's gonna fill in, and this is about the 4th year for this. I planted this in here from one little sprig, and it's just kind of taken over. There was some lemon balm in here. Lemon balm didn't do very well in here. I think the root system was too shallow for it, so it didn't do great. Our fennel, this stuff is crazy. This is what we got this year at the Master Gardener's Plant Sale, and it was a little bitty guy. I put him in here, and I was like, well, we'll see what happens, Oscar. And he did great, and he's growing, and it's getting new fronds on it, so really pretty. Smells fantastic. And fennel's great for homemade pizzas. I mean, you can put it in your pickling spice. It adds a different kick, so really enjoy that. My hyssop, this Annie's hyssop, man, every time you come up next to it, you brush against it, smells like licorice. Not my favorite flavor or smell, but the pollinators love this thing, and I just call it like a butterfly bush because it attracts so many butterflies, and the butterflies are massive when they come to this thing, and it's done great. Little plant that I planted, again, got it from the Master Gardener's Plant Sale about 3 years ago. This is its 3rd year. It's spread in this flower bed, and so I'm hoping this whole thing creates a screen for the old garden. So far so good. It's doing great. I did move one of our greenhouses out here. I've got to tie it down. The wind blew it over the other day. There's nothing in it yet, but we thought we would have a little greenhouse space, so it's not so far from our other greenhouse for us to, transfer the plants, get them ready, harden them off for the old garden for next year. And then I need to talk to you about this loofah. This bunch of fantastic loofah, spiderweb, has done great. These seeds I started from seeds that I had collected from 2 plants that I had planted last year that produced. Planted 6 plants, and it is still going strong. And again, like I said in the past, this thing has a long grow season, about 120 days. These little loofahs will stay on here. You can leave them on until your first freeze, and they will dry, and it's easier to peel and dry out the loofahs and get the seeds out. But I don't know if you know how big these things get. This thing is at least almost 2 feet. I mean, it's my biggest one. I'm so excited. It's still green. There's still tons on here. There's new growth. We've got a lot of new loofahs coming up on it. The flowers are beautiful, and they smell really good. And the hummingbirds love this thing, so they're all over it every day. I usually come through and pick out the dead leaves just so it kind of looks nice, but it's great. It's doing fantastic. I mean, these guys are this is gonna be one of my biggest loofahs. And the cool part is it doesn't matter how long they get, you can trim them down to size. And I've already harvested 5 of these this year. Matter of fact, here's a new one. So this guy is gonna keep growing until our first freeze, and I'm just gonna let him go. And I plan on giving these as gifts. I plan on eventually, when we get our goats, selling these things. But overall, the old garden has done fantastic with my flowers, what I've started from seed, what I've grown. The only downfall was the pumpkins, but overall this thing has, the old garden's been my favorite piece, I think, just because this started from a little bitty space that Grandma had created, and it has transformed into magic. I mean, just magic. And cats love it. Frazzy's playing in sweet potatoes. We're just super excited about what we've started. And one final thing before I let you go is my petunias. I started one little plant of petunias. This is the 2nd year. These guys will reseed themselves. They spread like wildfire. They're like little vines, and they come along and they just kind of take over, but birds and bees love them. And surprise, surprise, I had planted some, what was it called? Alyssum. Now, I think these are also some petunia sprouts. But my alyssum, it decides to come back. Like, here is my sprout for my alyssum. I didn't realize it would reseed itself. It grew really well, and it does great in spring. It does great in fall. Summer, not so much, so you just pull out the dead. And hi, Fraz. Frazzy is our special cat. She's special. And but it just amazes me. This is what the petunias do. They seed themselves, and they'll come back, and they're a perennial. Crazy enough. So this thing has done fantastic, I'm telling you. And I plan on adding more flowers, a bigger variety of flowers in this. So we'll have to follow that. But overall, the old garden, the transformation it started with, where there was nothing in here. I mean, it was just soil. It was just bone dry, no plants. And the growth that we've had in the last 4 to 5 months has just been so amazing. My Shasta daisies are coming back. Shasta daisies, yay! Super excited. So I appreciate you all, and thank you for letting me show you the transformation that we've had in this part of the old garden. This is my glory, my flower glory. So hopefully you'll be able to see a variety next year. But this year it was a success, and I'm super proud. So we will talk with you soon.
It would not be a complete tour through here, through the old garden, if we did not talk on just a few things here. So we're going to touch first on the strawberry bed. The strawberry bed, I am super excited about it. The strawberries did really well through the course of the summer. I'm going to give it an NA, however, because anybody who knows and watches the channel knows that we did not let any of our flowers develop into strawberries. I'm sorry, let me take that back. I let one go and it was delicious. But other than that, we kind of did what the instructions said, and we cut the flowers off through the course of the year to encourage the roots of these plants to establish themselves, so that going forward, we should have a successful strawberry patch for years and years to come. So, as you know, again, it gets an NA, but we're really excited about seeing what happens with these berries in the springtime. Also down here, these guys get an A. These were garlic grew in both of these back rows. We also had onions in this little bit here. Now, the reason this gets an A is because we ended up with 36 heads of garlic. And you take that in addition to the garlic we had spread around the other parts of the property. We've been eating garlic as much as we possibly can, and we still have huge amounts of it to go through the fall. We won't have to buy garlic to plant this year, which is another encouraging sign. I also wanted to give a shout out to this fig tree down here. 2 years ago, we had just a crazy winter storm that came through and killed all the branches. The fig tree came back from the root system, and we actually got 2 figs off of it, so that's encouraging. But more encouraging than anything is the way that it, you know, the actual growth on it, the way it bushed back out the way it was originally. And we're hoping that starting next year, we can go back to getting as many figs as we did in the past. Because we were able to, twice a year, we were able to put up a huge amount of fig jelly. We were also able to freeze some figs, and we still had figs left over to give out. So this guy down here is really exciting for us to watch going forward. And then we put, you know, of course, anybody who watches know we keep our strawberries here in this iron kettle. It gets the same NA. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, though, were these blackberries. They wrap all the way around, and these blackberries were phenomenal. We were able to put up a couple gallons off of just this, and that's in addition to what we ate in our salads and things. So we have 2-gallon bags full of blackberries just from this little bit here to kind of carry us through the winter time whenever we need a taste of spring and summer. Well, that wraps up the first part of our summer garden review series. Next week we'll do the top garden and we'll go through it. As always, I would like to say thank you to everybody who made it here till the end of the video. We really appreciate it. And until next time, I hope all you folks take care of yourselves. Peace.